I think I could maybe build something cool, but I can't do those cycles quickly. I don't know how to code. I think the hope or the promise is that, maybe AI will be the thing that actually allows us to do that, allows anybody to do those types of cycles very quickly. If you look at the top uses of AI right now, of ChatGPT, like coding is, I think, the number one. It's the number one thing used out for AI right now. It can ask you use it to, I don't know, get a recipe or do something else like that. But, the bigger thing and the number one, if you just look at all the queries, is how to code. And so can AI do that for the normal person? If you're just a mortgage professional out there and you want to build a cool app, do you have to go to a professional firm, or can you use ChatGPT to do what Ben does already, which is those quick cycles and build things? So hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Mortgage Tech Talks. As always, I'm your host, Tom. Today is another market update. We talk about some interesting things, specifically around lenders and platforms, what we're seeing, some interesting things there, and what I think the downstream effects of these very interesting moves might be. So we have a full discussion on that. We'll then, in story number 2, talk a little bit about just some stuff that's happening in the market, I guess more of it's basically a nice trip and things that are going on. I just wanted to kind of comment, but also in a very interesting way, kind of tie it back to the first story, how these trips somehow are related to lenders and platforms. We'll get into all that. And then finally, I call it a new feature, a new thing in a very prominent tech platform. And I shout out the people behind it and tell you why they have superpowers and how you maybe one day could also have the same superpower. All this and more, we'll see you on the other side. Okay, so the first story that I want to talk about is one that if you're affected by it, it's a very big deal. If you're not affected by it, maybe it didn't even pop up on your radar. But what it is, long story short, is that a decision was made so that Desjardins, big lender, especially in Quebec, their connection with Filogix is going to be disconnected. I think that's the best way to put it. So obviously it is a big deal, of course, if you are using Desjardins and submitting through Filogix, and it actually also impacts at least Finmo because Finmo uses Filogix's pipes to get there. And I'd imagine it would affect, anybody who's using Scarlet in that region, because I think that Scarlet does use Filogix. I think Scarlet actually uses both Filogix and Velocity's pipes. It's up to you. But if you're using Scarlet with Filogix's pipes, then of course that it would affect you too. So that's the long and the short of it. So obviously a really big deal for, I guess, anybody who's using it. It is pretty interesting. I guess the first question is to say, okay, well, why did this happen? Why was this decision made? And again, I don't know personally. I don't have any type of insight knowledge. If you're looking for that, I'm not the person to ask. But I do like to at least speculate. I think that's part of the fun of this podcast. And I think one of the best ways to think of anything like this is, if you guys have seen the movie Departed, Alec Baldwin, in one scene, he says, "Qui bueno," right? Who, or "Qui bono," I think something like that. And it's like, who benefits, right? Who is the beneficiary of something like this? And really, I think there's two ways to look at it. I mean, really, it could be Desjardins that benefits. Maybe this was a very high cost connection, right? So maybe it was just simply that there was a lot of overhead. Maybe there was things that needed to be repaired, and looking at it, it was just way too big of a repair to make. And instead of remaking the bridge, they just said, hey, we have other highways that we like better. I don't know. So maybe that was a potential way to look at it. The key bono might have been just Desjardins themselves in terms of the cost it would have been to maintain it. And then the other, I guess, who benefits from it, of course, would be the other submission platforms, I guess, the non-Filogix ones, or the platforms who aren't using Filogix's bridge to connect to Desjardins. Obviously, Desjardins isn't just cutting themselves off from the broker market. They're saying, hey, we're cutting off this one, but we still have the highway to, let's say, Boss or Velocity, some of these other types of firms. And so do they benefit? Are these other platforms behind this move? I don't think directly, right? That happens sometimes where people ask for exclusivity, but I actually don't know. What probably is a little bit more likely, in my opinion, is that these other platforms decide to say, hey, for our highway, our tolls are going to be a little bit less, right? Because if you listen to our previous episode, you know that in order for these highways to be open, it's actually maintained by the platforms, and to use it, the lenders have to pay. And so maybe they're paying a lot to Filogix. Maybe they're paying quite a bit less to some of these other firms. And they just took a look at it again and said, okay, do you know what? I'm just going to go to my lower cost highways. I'm going to start using that exclusively. they're better off. The lender is Desjardins, and I guess maybe these other platforms are as well. So it's an interesting dynamic. I think this isn't unique. This isn't the first time something like this has happened. I mean, if you look recently, even in the past couple of years, I think it was BMO who was at least first when they came to the broker market with their Broker Edge product. They were exclusively through Boss. And then also there was HSBC again who came to market, and before the RBC acquisition by HSBC, they were serving the broker market, and they would do that exclusively through Velocity. So this idea of these platforms / lenders in collaboration saying, hey, only my version of the bridge is going to be the one that's going to be used in the market is not new, right? It's a strategy, and I think there's winners and there's losers with these types of strategies. So it'd be interesting just to pay attention to is this just the first domino of a bunch to fall, right? Is now Filogic's going to turn around and go to maybe some other lender and say, hey, this is what just happened to Desjardins. How do we respond? How do we maybe make sure that if we're not getting as much traffic on this bridge, that we can increase the traffic on other bridges doing similar types of tactics? I don't know. I think it's interesting. I think it's just something to pay attention to. I mean, I think for Filogix and Finmo and all these other platforms that are affected in a negative way, I think they'll figure it out. I don't think this is by any means catastrophic. I think there's a lot of smart people at all those organizations, and they'll figure it out. But the only thing I'll kind of mention, and my kind of 2 cents on this, is it's an interesting thing because it starts to almost bite the hand that feeds you. And this is what I mean by this, which is, if I'm a broker and I was using Filogix to submit to Desjardins, now I can't. And so instead, what I'm going to do is maybe I'm going to switch over to use Boss or maybe one of these platforms that are. So now I'm using Filogix and I'm using Boss. And then maybe something else happens where, okay, now maybe only, I don't know, lender X goes through, I don't know, call it Velocity. I don't know. I'm just using another example. And so now I'm logging into 3 places, right? So now I'm logging into Filogix as I've always had, but I need to go into Boss for Desjardins, and I need to go into Velocity to do lender X. And so now the benefit of the deal submission platform, which was one place I could go, I could write all my deals, all my data was there, I could just, decide which lender and hit go, becomes a little bit less. And so, this whole marketplace that is very valuable for really everyone involved is starting to unwind a little bit, right? And so, where this could end up, if you take that to its extreme, if I'm logging in to 10 different platforms to access 10 different lenders, why even use the platform, right? That's where this goes, is to say, okay, yeah, what is the benefit of the platform? Oh, my data is not aggregated. I have to do different things in different places. And then the lender might turn around and say, hey, yeah, good point. Why would you? Why don't you just log into my portal? It's easier. We have a couple perks. There's maybe some unique products that we only offer through our portal. Maybe it's a little bit of a discount. I don't know. But maybe that happens, right? So while these moves are interesting, I'll see how different, competitors respond to it. It'd also be interesting to look at the macro to say, hey, are these types of moves undermining the actual value that these types of platforms provide? I don't know. I mean, that's like probably what I just described as a future vision years and years and years away. But again, this is maybe just the first domino to fall. And maybe 5-10 years from now, we're going to look back and say, how did this happen? We had, these marketplaces that were all consolidated. I could access any lender from it. Now I got to go to all these different portals, which, by the way, is exactly how it works in insurance, exactly how it works in the US. So we're the exception, not the rule. And, maybe we just are going to deviate back to the mean. Maybe you are going to go back towards what the rule is, which is to submit these things, you have to go into all these different portals. So we'll see. We'll see how that ends up. Okay, next topic here. I'm going to shout out this one just because it was all over my LinkedIn feed and I thought it was newsworthy. It was just M3 had I think they called it their R&R VIP trip. So it looked like a fun time for the group there at M3. Congrats. I think it looks like a well put together event. Everyone was smiling, having a good time. So, and if you were one of the brokers that went, congrats. Seems like a great time. The only thing that I'll kind of call out, which I thought was kind of interesting, was, one post. And I don't think this is unique to this year. Again, not a unique concept, but it caught my eye. So I thought I'd talk about it, where basically they shout out and they say, hey, do you know what? If you want to go on this trip next year, right? If you see all these photos and you really want to do it, well, you can enter a chance to win a ticket to this trip. And all you have to do is you have to submit, I think it was 75% of your submissions through Boss. There were a couple other criteria as well. I don't remember and I won't go through them all. But the point is that it's kind of interesting. I mean, it's just a reflection to say, For most software, maybe I should say just most services, right? So with Boss, you're getting a service, right? It's a software, you log in, you can do stuff. For most services, you pay and then you get the service, right? So you go to the dry cleaners. I don't know why I thought of that example. Here's my money. Please dry clean my shirt. They give you a shirt back. In this case, Boss is saying, hey, do you know what? Here's my service. Here's my dry clean shirt. Here you go. And if you dry clean with me enough, I'm going to give you a bonus. And keep in mind, this dry cleaning analogy is kind of breaking down, but for Boss, it doesn't cost you anything to log in and use it. You're not paying money. You're not saying here's $100 a month to use your service. It's already free to begin with. And now they're layering on top of it to say, hey, it's not just free, but we'll actually put together context and kind of pay you in a sense to actually use my platform. And so it's just an interesting thing. I thought I'd call that out. I think that, it's just a reminder of, again, we talked about it in previous episodes, the whole value chain of how this really works, where when you use Boss in this case or whatever else is out there, the lender is paying that platform, right? So that's part of the reason why that they're willing to do these types of contests. But I also think it's an interesting way to look at it of how these network effect type businesses work, right? So another type of business kind of like this was Uber, right? So I'll use the Uber example. They were giving like crazy discounts when they first came. I remember back in the day in Toronto, I was during my, I guess, time of my life where I was going to the bar like, I don't know, 4 nights. Anyway, it doesn't matter. I was going a bunch. And it was just constant like 50% off, $20 off, like a $25. Like it was just insane. It was basically free to use this platform. But why were they able to do it? It's kind of similar to this because they knew they get enough riders, me, using the platform. Then they're going to get enough, they're going to suck up all the drivers. Drivers are going to come over here. And then with more drivers, the experience becomes better because there's quicker availability, and then more riders come, and then it becomes this snowball effect. And basically what you're doing is, and what they were doing in that time, you can kind of read their financial statements, is they were losing just billions and billions of dollars, but it was just all part of the long-term strategy. Say, we're going to do this and we're just going to choke out the competition. We're going to build the best marketplace. We're going to build the best network. And we're going to do that for a long period of time. It's just like who can hold their breath the longest. That's really what the question was. And they had some big oxygen tanks from SoftBank and other people over there. They held their breath the longest. And so when they finally exhaled and said, okay, now we got to make some money, they looked around and there were no competitors. And so, I think something similar is happening here too, right? Where, hey, if I'm on these platforms and I get a lot of people on here, again, I'm going to attract more lenders. More lenders are going to want to use my highway. And really it relates to the first story, right? And you're going to have more leverage. You can have more of these kind of interesting conversations with lenders if you have a lot of users on it. I don't think necessarily that they're trying to choke out their competition like the Uber example, but what they're trying to do is get as many people using the platform, because at the very least that gives them leverage over the lenders. It makes it harder for them to be cut off, right? And so more adoption of brokers on these platforms is just better in the sense, it pays many times over because of the leverage they get on the lender side of things. Okay, last story here. This one is like an older story. But I don't think I covered it and I want to. And so we're going to get into it here. But long story short, this is kind of getting deep into the tech side of things, is Ben Digi. We've had Ben on the podcast before. He's, of course, the founder, creator, engineer of the Canadian Mortgage app. And he recently came out with, I say recent, this was like 3 months ago now, just some updates. So I think it's pretty cool. He shouts out in this post some of the people who are helping him out figure out the best scenario here. But what it is, it's just a scenario planning part of his app, right? So you can see it kind of he goes through a bunch of the different things where it's a tool where you can say, hey, for you as a mortgage professional, you're talking to a client, they want to say, hey, should I go fixed or variable? He puts together these scenarios for you. So fixed or variable, that's a simple one. And of course he has that here. But what I really like are some of I think the next one I like best, which is he's able to compare. And there's a little bit of obviously speculation here. Say, hey, if I just took a 5-year fix now, or I took a 3 and then I tacked on a 2 at the end, and that's where the speculation is, because you don't really know the rate of the 2 3 years from now. What will be my total interest paid over that period of time? Right, pretty cool. Compare 6, probably 6 different lenders, feature sheet, break now or later, right? So the gamesmanship of when you should break your mortgage. And if you break it, you might get savings, but obviously there's a breakage penalty. So again, how do you kind of navigate these? How do you know the optimal point along there that's like, okay, now it makes sense. Anytime after this date, it makes sense to break. And he puts it all together. So it's a really nice tool. I mean, I think well done. He was showing me this. I saw this at the Be the Better Broker Summit. So that was something that Dustin Woodhouse, a couple months ago in Whistler, and he's showing me it, and it is really impressive. He does a fantastic job, and really, he does that with all of all the stuff he puts together. And honestly, I think the reason for that is that I really do think that Ben, and if you're listening to this, Ben, I'm really kind of pumping your tires a bit here, but I think you're a good example of someone who understands the mortgage space, right? If you're trying to explain even a couple of those concepts that I just talked about to your friend or your uncle or whoever, it's going to go over their head a little bit. But Ben understands that intimately, and he's an engineer, and he's not just a product manager where he can tell people what to do. He gets in and he codes. He actually types and he goes. And so what it allows for, and I think this is what's the superpower, is just super quick iterations. And if anyone's ever built tech, they know what I mean by this, where, I look at a piece of software, let's say, and I want to make it better. If I don't know how to do that, right? If I don't actually know how to write the code, I have to describe my problem. I have to send it to someone who actually does the code. They do it. It comes back. It's probably not the way that I want it. And then I got to do that again, and probably 2-3 times. And then it's not perfect, but it's good enough. And they say, whatever, we'll just move on. That whole process I just described, if you have a good team behind you, it's going to take a week, probably 2. But if you're the person who's actually doing the typing, the coding, you can do that. First of all, you can do a cycle probably, I don't know, within a couple minutes, depending on how difficult it is. It's extremely quick. It's going to be exactly to your speculation. You don't have to describe what's in your head to somebody else. You can go exactly to how you've envisioned it. And instead of 2-3 iterations and saying good enough, you can do 20 iterations. And there is no such thing as good enough. It's always exactly as you had it. And so you can just iterate, and get this thing to exactly what you want. And I think that's why Ben and his app has been so technically impressive and so interesting, because he's able to do that type of activity where he gets the use case intimately from a user perspective and a mortgage perspective. And then he's able to go and actually build it and see the results and go and build very, very, very quickly. And so, Ben, you're my shout out this week, but congrats there. And the last thing I'll kind of leave everyone with, if you are kind of thinking about that and saying, God, I'd love to be able to do that. I'm maybe building something out there, and I think I could maybe build something cool, but I can't do those cycles quickly. I don't know how to code. I think the hope or the promise is that, maybe AI will be the thing that actually allows us to do that, allows anybody to do those types of cycles very quickly. And if you look at the top uses of AI right now, of ChatGPT, like coding is, I think, the number one, right? It's the number one thing used out for AI right now. It can ask you, you can use it to, I don't know, get a recipe or do something else like that. But the bigger thing and the number one, if you just look at all the queries, is how to code. And so can I do that for the normal person? If you're just a mortgage professional out there and you want to build a cool app, do you have to go to a professional firm, or can you use ChatGPT to do what Ben does already, which is those quick cycles and build things? So it's an exciting future. It's a cool one. It's one that people aren't really talking about because obviously it's a little bit technical as it relates to AI, but it's one that excites me. And hopefully it excites, anyone listening to this podcast who's also passionate about tech. So I'll leave it there. That was your market update for this week. I hope it was interesting. And as always, thanks so much for listening. If you found this interesting, please just share it with one colleague, one friend. It's how we grow the following. But thanks. We'll see you next week.